is very fast. First time I knew that, he was in the 5th grade, and he was at a baseball game. He didn't play a lot of baseball as a kid, but I happened to be watching him, and his parents were gone. I think he was staying with us that weekend. Anyway, he hit the ball down the left field line, beyond the reach of the outfielder. And I watched the ball till it hit the ground. Then I turned to see where Dawson was, and he should be somewhere between first and second. And that kid had already rounded second on the way to third. That's the first time I knew how fast he was. Have you seen him run a race? Have you seen him run a race? Well, yeah, I think some of you have. He runs, in high school, he ran the 100, the 200, and the short relays. I've had the privilege a couple times of being where I could see him up close as he approached the finish line. And I'll tell you, he is one determined kid. One thought in his mind, one concentration in that mind, that is to get to that finish line before anybody else. And he usually did. I'm going to read 2 verses of scripture from Hebrews 12, and it's about us running a race to spread Christianity. So if you let me just read those 2 verses for you. I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version because it says a couple things that I use in the sermon. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Running the race. It indicates that we need to run a race, the race that is set before us. And I think the race is to spread Christianity. And what I get from the scriptures is that we're not to run this haphazardly or leisurely. We're not to jog at this race, but we're to run as fast as we can, as fast as we possibly can. In order to do that, it even suggests we lay aside some hindrances, some weights that might keep us from running that fast race. If you watch the Olympics, the swimmers in the Olympics, you note that the swimmers wear caps, both male and female. And if the men don't wear a cap, they shave their head. They shave all the body hair off their face because hair is a resistance. If you're trying to swim as fast as you can, and we're talking about split seconds, if you're running as fast as you can, don't have any hair slowing you down. And then with people run track, they wear very skin-tight clothing, so there's as little resistance as possible. Probably if culture would let them, they might run naked. There'd be no problem there. I haven't seen one of those races yet, but I'm willing to go look if they insist on it. So, laying aside the weights to run as fast as we can, if you want. Well, this summer, we are trying to offer opportunities for you, in a sense, to lay aside some weights and to serve God outside the walls of this church, meeting God in the neighborhood. You can do whatever your imagination comes with. Your imagination probably limits what you can do in witnessing for Christ this summer. But the church coordination team has suggested several things that might help you do some things. We talked about simulation this Thursday night. I've done simulations, and you become poor. You're in poverty for a couple hours, and see what it feels like. Suppose you wanted to vote and you don't have a driver's license. Do you have a birth certificate with you? Do you have a passport with you? No, we don't carry those, do we? So anyway, you could do that. If you want to, last Sunday or next Sunday, you can go to Grace Episcopal Church, just down the road here. They serve a meal to people on Sunday afternoons, every Sunday afternoon, but we're volunteering last Sunday and next Sunday. Last Sunday, we served 204 meals, basically in 1 hour's time. A lot of meals, a lot of people, a lot of help. If you want to you can do that next Sunday, 2:15 to 4:15. Help serve those meals. They have it down pat. They've been doing it for 8 years. Or if Sunday's not your thing, you can go on Saturday the 29th to the fairgrounds, and you can help pass out backpacks to grade school or to children in school. You can do that. Our circle dinners on Tuesday night here, you can come and help feed the people here, or perhaps most importantly, sit down and talk with them. Or there's a soup kitchen later in Blood and Fire in August. You can do that. We help serve some meals there. Many opportunities, but don't limit yourself to what we are suggesting as possible. Just do something to get you outside these walls, something to get you joining God in the neighborhood. Just do it now this summer, and then maybe you'll continue to do it. We've had quite a few people who volunteered to do these things, but not a majority. So more people have not volunteered to do one of these activities than have. So I'm encouraging you to do that. They can still come to Tuesday night, even though they haven't registered right. Where's Wes? He gone? Yeah, right. There he is. You can still do that Tuesday night at the ballroom in the Student Center. All right. Well, opportunities to join that are numerous if you want anyway. So we are encouraging you to get out into the neighborhood and to do some things. And if you're going to run this race as best you can, there are several factors that you need to lay aside. There's some factors that keep you from running the race as best you can. I want to mention two of them today. Then I'll do a little different. I don't have just 2 points, so don't get excited. Talk a little longer than that. But one of the points is that one of the factors that hurts us from running the race as best we can is the possible problem with our worship services, with the kind of worship service we have. Now, I don't know if I should say this in this group or not, but I really like the old traditional kind of service. I like it where, we have a choir in the robes, or in this sense, and we have a good pipe organ. We have a beautiful sanctuary. I even like when people dress up to come to church. That's me, though, and that's not necessarily you. So when Barb and I first came here, which is 1966, how many have been here that long? Oh, 6, 7, 8. So if I'm lying, you would know it. The other people won't know that. But if I recall right, when we came in 66, our minister frequently wore a robe in the pulpit. Not always, I don't think, but often he did. We never, ever called him by his first name. But then we hadn't called the pastors before by their first names either. It was after that when Dan Maddox became pastor, and some of the members said, I can't call him by his first name. They don't see that problem with Wade, do we? When Wade got his doctorate, I said, I want to put that in the bulletin, but I assured him we were not going to call him Dr. Allen. He's still going to be Wade to all of us. So, well, we never called him by first name. We had a beautiful choir in robe with the pipe organ when we came here in 66. The men wore coats and ties. The women wore skirts or dresses. I remember when Nancy DeMott became the director of Christian education, some of the respectable ladies counseled her right after she got here, saying that her skirts were too short. How do you have too short? You don't even have skirts and dresses on. What am I talking about? So, but they were too short. They said we had services on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night for children, but also Wednesday night for adults, if you want. So that was a very traditional kind of worship in those days. Traditional in the amount of time we worship and what we wore in worship. But times have changed. And hopefully we've come to realize that none of that formality, dressing up, pipe organ, or whatever it might be, choir, none of that is necessary to our Christianity. If we insist that any of those are, then we're making our religion too formal, too stereotyped. It does not mean now that the formal, traditional kind of worship is wrong. No, not at all. I love that kind of worship. Not long ago, we were in Seattle, Washington, and had beautiful choir, great pipe organ, wonderful surrounding, wonderful service. I love that kind of service. It's not wrong, but what is wrong is to insist that's the only way to worship. And there was a time in this church when that's what we did. That was the only way to worship. In a sense, that type of religion is kind of the kind of religion they had in Jesus' time. I don't think there are any more religious people in the world than the Pharisees. I mean, they obeyed all the laws, they tithed, they worshiped, they prayed, and yet the Gospels record 12 controversies that Jesus had with these religious leaders. He rebuked them, he criticized them, these religious people, because you see, to them, what was most important was obeying a law or not breaking the law. That's more important than inward devotion or faith, or inward faith. Anyways, unfortunately, quite a few Americans still have that viewpoint of Christianity. They see Christianity as a series of don'ts. That's what Christians do. They don't do this, they don't do that, and they don't do that. And they don't have any fun either. That's how people see us sometimes. A day after a very challenging message, one day after a very challenging, same day, the preacher preached this challenging, but several people waited after church, men and women, and greeted him. And he said, Pastor, we think it's time we do something. And of course, he was great. I said something that caused people to react the right way. But they said, before we go out and do anything, we need to figure out what is we need to do and what it is we should not do. And so they began to figure that out. And one person said, well, he said, I like to dance. And some people probably looked like, what do you mean? I like to, but he said, I think drinking is immoral. And another person stood up and said, well, I think an occasional nip is okay, but the movies are really sinful these days. And a woman spoke and said, well, I like the movies, but I don't think smoking is what we should be doing. And on and on and on and on they went. And finally, later in the afternoon, they all went home having decided nothing. See, we went the wrong approach. What we really need to do is to figure out very positive things we can do rather than trying to figure out negative things we should not do. I remember the first time Barb and I went to a big mega, big and mega are the same thing. We went to a mega church in the suburbs of Chicago. This is more than 20 years ago. Our youngest son was working in Chicago then. And that church was huge. The gymnasium, if I recall right, you could put 3 basketball courts in that gymnasium. It had a bookstore, not just a library, but a store. And Shannon, our son, said it's the first church he'd ever been in that had a food court. In fact, you could buy your food there, you could eat your food there, maybe while the service is going on, I'm not sure, but you certainly could buy it and eat it there if you wanted to anyway. Well, I wore a coat and tie to that service, as I almost always did in those days. And of the 1,000 or so people in that congregation that Sunday, I think there were 6 of us who had coats and ties on. And we all were visitors, probably, I don't know. They had no organ, they had no choir, they had a praise band, and it was really good. That church's worship style, this is more than 20 years ago, that church's worship style was very different than First Baptist of Muncie. And yet, that church and others like it were setting a trend that soon became very common, if not even a majority of the case of Protestant churches in America. And what we learned from that trend, now get this, I hope you realize this is true, you can actually love the Lord and witness for the Lord while you are worshiping in shorts or wearing sandals or singing this terrible, terrible contemporary music. Do you think that's true? Well, we learned that. Thank goodness we did anyway. Now, there's nothing wrong with that traditional service. I love that traditional service, but it is wrong when we say that's the only kind of service anyway. So, well, which is larger today here, this First Baptist? Is it the first service, 9:15, the traditional service, or this service at 10:40, the contemporary? Which is larger in the number of people who come? You don't know because you don't go to the other one, you know. I've been to both today. I've been to both several times. This is larger. Okay, that we know. Which is more Christian, the first service or the second service? I'm afraid what you might say, and I'll tell them what you'll say. Both are good, all right? Where are most of the Christians? Are they in the first service or on this service? No, they're in both. They're in both. For some, though, worshiping in the traditional church service, formal dress, anthems you sing, or hymns you sing, so that really turned, they could not witness, they could not get any religious fervor in that kind of service. Once they got away from that and got into a contemporary service where you can dress the way you want and sing the songs you really enjoy, then their religious fervor came to them and they were able to witness. For them, breaking away from the traditional service was really crucial. And there's several like that. We went through a pretty rough time in our church history 10 or 12 years ago, what we call the worship wars. People wanted one style of worship. That's okay to want one style of worship, but we also were intolerant, really, to people who wanted the other style. Not only did we want one, we became critical of people who wanted the other style. I stood by one in a contemporary service, no, it was a traditional service, and he said, if I have to attend one more service like this, I'm never coming to this church again. And I thought, that's strange, that's really strong. I love music in a service. And so I can understand that you want a service where you like the music. And if you don't like the music in that service, then it makes that service not nearly as it's good for you anyway. So, all right. Barb and I recently took a ferry ride from Anacortes, Washington State, over to Sydney, British Columbia. We went over to see those beautiful Butchart Gardens over there. Oh, fantastic. But we on the ferry, we hadn't been out on the dock very long until the PA announcer, a woman voice came on and said, would the owner of the silver Chevy Impala with an Oregon license plate and the box of cookies on the dash, please go down, your alarm system has gone off. Would you go down and turn it off? And about 5 minutes later, that same voice came on and mentioned another car whose alarm system had gone off, and then said, there's enough shaking on the ferry that it's not unusual for car alarms to go off. Would you all go down and turn them off? We had set ours on, so it didn't have to do that, but anyway, that was the situation. Well, it didn't take much during the worship wars to upset our alarm systems. So one hindrance is the worship style. And I hope if you're here, then that is not a hindrance for you, that you can worship here the way you want, and you can enjoy that. Whereas people in the first service also can enjoy the way they worship. All right. Another hindrance is what we call character faults. There are certain, all of us have some, there are certain character faults that keep us from witnessing the best we can. Something about our personality that doesn't make our Christianity all that great. One of those faults might simply be pride. We're just proud people. Too proud to invite somebody to come to church. Too proud to talk to somebody about becoming a Christian. After all, we have certain standing in the society. I mean, we're pretty important people. And what if they turned us down? What if we invited them to church and they said no? What would that do to our pride? We don't like that. So rather than risk being turned down, rather than risk failure, we simply don't witness verbally. Maybe they can just see Christianity in us. We don't have to say anything about it. If you're not quite sure how important you are, I have a test for you. Take a bowl, fill it with water, put your index finger in it and keep it in there about 20 seconds. Then take it out and see what kind of dent you left. None. Another character fault is impatience. We just don't have the patience to work with people and to really win their friendships and try to help them to see what Christianity is all about. We're not that patient. I think it was the first spring after the Allens came here, they wanted to plant a small garden in their backyard. And for some reason, they asked me with my little tiller to come out and break up the ground, which I did. And we planted several different plants. Among them, we planted tomato seeds. Now, I'd never planted tomato seeds outside before. I'd planted tomato plants, but seeds. And Levi, who was quite young then, we're talking about 8 years ago or something like that, he was really excited about what we were doing, particularly the seeds. And the next morning, he got up and rushed out to the garden to see if there were any tomatoes yet. He was a little disappointed, I think, when he saw that. Just not as patient as he ought to be anyway. We're sometimes as equally impatient. We simply don't nurture the friendships that we need. As someone wrote, some people want to get to the promised land without going through the wilderness, and it's hard to do that. Dishonesty is another character fault. I'll tell you, when a Christian is shown to be dishonest, non-Christians lose confidence not only in that person, but other Christians as well. This is what Christians are like. They're just not honest people. Pastor preached one Sunday on honesty. Just so happened the bus driver was attending his first service ever in that church. The next day, the bus driver was driving and the preacher got on his bus. Not the normal thing, but he did. Preacher gave him some money for the fare, and the bus driver gave him change back, and the preacher went down and sat down. Luckily, he counted his change. He had too much change. He got up, went back up to the bus driver and said, "You gave me too much change." Bus driver said, "I know. I was in your service yesterday. I just want to know if you practice what you preach." I don't know anything that can negate our Christianity more than being dishonest. If we are dishonest, people just lose respect for us and in turn then lose respect for other Christians. Another character fault is that we're too self-centered, too selfish. Everything revolves around us. What does this make us look like? Well, how do we do this or not? Or along with that, the problem that we may simply have a lack of real commitment. How committed are we? Being a dedicated Christian is not one of our goals. No. We come most Sundays to church. We give offerings occasionally. We even encourage our children to come on Wednesday night. That's enough. That's all God can expect of us. After all, that's more than most people do. That's more of a commitment than most people make. And I think that's enough. I spent the summer of 1957 in Hawaii as a summer missionary. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience, all paid for by Baptists in Illinois. I got to preach at the First Baptist Church of Waikiki several different times that summer. And they would have in attendance to be 25 members and 100 visitors. I also worked at church camps. I preached sometime to counselor, whatever, vacation Bible schools, all this sort of thing. Wonderful, wonderful experience. Sometime during the summer I was there, one night I prayed this prayer one night that tomorrow, remember I'm a missionary, I'm a summer missionary, so I'm doing things every day for the Lord, hopefully. But the next day I thought, I hope tomorrow there'll be some special opportunity, Lord, that you'll put out there for me, and I'll know it, I'll recognize it, and I'll do it. I prayed that prayer one night. The next morning, next day, sure enough, there was an opportunity, and I was able to do it. Second night, I prayed the same prayer. Second day, another chance. We recognized this as a special time to serve the Lord, and I was able to do it. Third night, the same prayer. Next morning, a third opportunity, and I did that again. And then I've been thinking, each of these began to take more commitment from me. Each took more time, each of these opportunities that I was able to resolve. Each got bigger and more difficult to do and took more time, and I became afraid. How far is this going to go, Lord? And on the fourth night, I did not pray the prayer. And the fourth day, nothing special happened. I was a missionary, and I lacked the commitment. I became afraid of what God was going to expect me to do, and I backed off. Well, we may conclude that we're doing all that God should expect of us. What more can God expect? We're content with our commitment, and we may even fear what God would expect of us if we really try to be better Christians. And someone said, if we're really going to serve the Lord, we're going to have to come down out of the grandstand and get onto the playing field. Well, in addition to laying aside these weights, that Hebrews also said we're to look to Jesus as our guide. Well, what did Jesus do to make Christianity effective? What did he do to spread Christianity? Well, one thing he did is he went to the people. He did not sit in the synagogue with folded hands waiting for people to come to him. He went to them, such as, I'll get this list now. He went to the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, Jacob's well, the wilderness. He went to Galilee, Cana, Capernaum, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, Sychar, Nazareth, Bethsaida, Gennesaret, Caesarea Philippi, Bethany, and Jericho, to name a few places. He went everywhere. What did he do in Palestine? He went to all parts of Palestine. He went to the countryside, the desert, and fields filled with grain. He went to the cities, the villages. He went into people's homes and their workplaces, to the market, and to their places to worship. What does it mean to be a Christian? It means to be like Jesus. And what did Jesus do? He went to the people. If we're to be like Jesus, we are to go to the people. Dan back in LA, occasionally want to remind me that we visited them years ago, invited them to church, probably invited them to the Sunday school class as well. I just asked LMA between services, how many years ago was that? Less than 50, but more than 40. We think it's about 45, something like that. 1970s when she said she's baptized. So somewhere, where are you? Where's LMA there? Somewhere in there. Let's say 45 years ago, I went there and asked them to come, and lo and behold, Barb and I went there, and they came. Now, some of you may begrudge the fact that we did that. But for these last 45 years or so, they've been so crucial to this church. And we went to them, and they came to us. All right. As Jesus went to all these places, did he refuse to associate with certain people? Certainly not. He never refused to associate with somebody because that person was inferior to Jesus, nor did he refuse to associate with somebody because Jesus didn't like them. It's almost absurd to say Jesus didn't like somebody. He might have didn't like what they did or what they said, but he certainly didn't dislike them as a person anyway. So with what kinds of people did Jesus associate? He associated with the rich and the poor, master and servant, well-educated and illiterate, religious leaders and common worshipers, heads of households and widows, old and young, healthy and sick. In other words, he associated with everybody with whom he passed. What does it mean to be a Christian? It means to be like Jesus. Therefore, it means we need to associate with all kinds. We need to associate with people regardless of their social, economic, educational, intellectual, or racial background or standing. Several years ago, Barb used to go to the Boys and Girls Club on South Madison and work with those young people, those children, the preteens and early teens, to sing, help them sing better. They weren't particularly good singers, but they were enthusiastic singers. And then they would go out and sing in nursing homes and places like that. And she did this over a period of time. They all came from poor homes of poor income, low income. About half of them were African American. And one of the things I like, several of these people would call her Miss Barb. That's how they referred to her. Not just Barb, but Miss Barb. Well, once we had them out for a cookout, a dozen or so of them, man, did they have an appetite. These are preteens and early teens. They ate everything we had, all the hamburgers, all the hot dogs, all the potato salad, all the potato chips, all the baked beans, all the pop. I even dropped one hamburger on the ground. They wanted that. But Barb worked with them, and before this is all over with, 6 of those kids came to our Bible school one summer. They'd never been to this church before. They'd never been to Bible school before. Barb worked with them, and they came. Besides going to the people and associating with all kinds of people, what else did Jesus do? Well, he ministered to the needs of people. Ministered to the needs. What kind of needs? Well, sometimes the physical needs. He ministered to the deaf, the dumb, the leper, the lame, the paralytic, and the hungry. He also ministered to the mental and spiritual needs of people. What does it mean to be a Christian? It means to be like Jesus. So should we attempt to meet the needs of people? Yes, we should. What kind of needs might we meet? Well, sometimes somebody just needs a friend. Do you have a close friend? Oh, I hope you do. Isn't a close friend really, really good? I mean, you can expose your warts and all to a close friend, and that person will not reject you, still love you, still help you, still work with you. Wonderful to have a close friend. I tell you, it's bad not to have a close friend. So sometimes somebody just needs you to be their friend. Maybe they need to be loved. Maybe they need to be encouraged. Some people just have a low self-esteem. Maybe they need to find a job. Or maybe they just need a ride to church. We have a lady right now who needs a ride to church. She's been coming to the second service mostly for several months now. She lives just off Riverside, east of Tillotson. But the person who's been bringing her to church all this time has moved out of state, so she doesn't have a ride. Maybe you can help her. If you are interested, you can talk to Barbara Turner or talk to me. We can tell you who she is and how you can reach her anyway. So we need to help meet the needs of people if we can anyway. So you can't help everybody, that's for sure, but maybe you can try and help somebody. That wouldn't be bad at all. Billy Graham was once asked, with the world as bad as it is, what can one person do? And he said, well, if my neighbor's house was on fire and I only had one bucket of water, I would throw it on that fire anyway, and hopefully other people would do the same thing. It's possible that we might think we're better Christians than we really are. Is that possible? That you might pat yourself on the back and say, hey, really, I'm a pretty good person, even though you don't do any of these things I said Jesus did. So Jesus went to the people. Do you go to the people, or do you wait for them to come to you? Jesus associated with all kinds. Do you associate with all kinds or just certain kinds of people? And Jesus met the needs of people, and do you try to make the needs of anybody? You know, in this day and age where we are here, people in the United States, they know about Christ. They've heard about Christ and God, and they've seen Christians. And part of the problem is they've seen Christians who aren't very Christian. And so they get turned off, and it's sometimes hard to win them over because they have seen so many bad examples of Christianity. And I maintain that the best way to convert people, or the best way to convince people to be Christian, is to see Christianity in action. To see in you Christianity. If they see wonderful effects of Christianity in you, they may want to be like you. My father, I kind of hesitate sometimes to say this because it looks like maybe I'm trying to brag on me, and that's not my point. My father rededicated his life when I was a junior in high school. He was a good man, a kind man all of his life, but he didn't attend church, didn't read the Bible, didn't pray, none of that. But my mother and I were both quite very active. In fact, my junior year in high school, I led the revival in several youth revivals. I led them singing several youth revivals. And this one night, I can't remember exactly where we were, but this one, something I'd never done before. I now know why I did it, but at the time I didn't know why. I decided to have a spontaneous men's choir, men's chorus, if you want. Several men apparently were in the congregation, and just get them together, and we'll sing one song. Just so happened my dad was in the audience that night. He almost never came to these things, but he was there that night. And so let's just, come on, men, come up and sing. My dad came up. I never heard him sing before in my life. Probably sang very poorly, but he sang. Not long after that, he rededicated his life. And someone said, after all these years, Lynn, why now? And he said, I looked out and I saw that my wife and my son were enjoying their Christianity so much. Man, let somebody see you enjoying your Christianity and see what kind of effect that has. We have a lot of people here in this church who have been doing things outside the walls of this church. They've been doing it for some time, not just this summer. I want to mention a few of them. I'm going to miss most of you. And I apologize ahead of time. I didn't try to get an extensive list at all. Just wanted to mention a few who do things. Like, for instance, Wes Russell, who taught that Bible study, that Bible class, to men in prison. That's outside the walls of this church. All right. What about Robert Burton and the Songers, Joe and Gail Songer, who went over and helped and counseled with Laura and Michael Williamson when they lost their son so mysteriously one night. Counseled with them. What about the young people who have worked one-on-one with special needs people at Camp Barnabas? That's outside the walls of this church. Dwayne and Dana Davis, who work every week basically with children in a grade school, either helping them to read better or read to them or their numbers, been doing this for over 10 years. Or what about Bob and Nina Oyston, who deliver Meals on Wheels? There are some of you who serve on boards of Monthly Mission or Christian Ministry. There are some of you who serve on the food pantry of Salvation Army regularly. I think we also mentioned all those, more than 24 people, more than 24 people have stepped forward this summer to do something they don't normally do because the pastor is gone. They're outside their comfort zones. But as far as I can tell, they are doing those jobs very well. Let me finish now. Remember, we are to lay aside any weights that might hinder our race to spread Christianity. Lay them aside. Get rid of them. And we are to look to Jesus as the example of how to live our lives. What does it mean to be a Christian? It means to be like Jesus. Amen.